Today on RevHang, we'll talk about the incredible 2022 Rolex 24-hour race at Daytona, the controversial Haas F1 car launch, our predictions for the 2022 F1 season, and our predictions for the 2022 IndyCar season. Let's do it! Hello everybody, welcome to Rev Hangout. I'm your host, Nathan Nevue, and alongside me today is my good friend and co-host, Ben Bagley. How are you today, Ben?
Oh, it's going pretty good. Pretty good Sunday. Relaxing. Just waiting for some races to start.
I'm so excited for the season of racing that's coming up. Got a lot of series starting up in early spring. I'm just super stoked. I'm a big F1 fan. I know you are too, but I'm looking forward to getting into more of the smaller classes like, MotoGP, even F2, F3.
Expanding the palette, such as it is.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we got quite a bit to talk about today. We're smack dab in the middle of the off season, but last week we saw an incredible endurance race in Daytona, Florida. This year's Rolex 24 was incredible from start to finish. There was nonstop action in almost every class, and we saw some fan favorites battle it out for their class wins. So let's go over the results real fast. In the DPI class, car number 60 completed 761 laps and took first place, driven by Oliver Jarvis, Tom Blomqvist, Helio Castroneves, and Simon Pagenaud. In the LMP2 class, car number 81 completed 751 laps, finished best in class and fifth overall, and it was driven by Eric Lux, Devlin Francesco, Patricio Award, and Colton Herta. In the LMP3 class, car number 74 crossed the line, completing 723 laps, finishing best in class and 13th overall. It was driven by Gar Robinson, Felipe Fraga, Kay Van Berlo, and Michael Cooper. In the GTD Pro class, car number 9 completed 711 laps, crossing the line best in class and 19th overall, driven by Matt Campbell, Mathieu Gemine, and Felipe Nazer. Rounding things off in the GTD class, car number 16 completed 707 laps, ending up best in class and 24th overall, driven by Ryan Hardwick, Zachary Rubicon, and Jan Halen, and Richard Yates. Congratulations to all the drivers and winners, and I'm really sorry for messing up your names.
Yeah, okay. So did you see any battles that kind of stuck out to you over the course? I know 24 hours is a long time to kind of sit and wait, but honestly, that battle between the two Porsches towards the end was really entertaining to watch. It's probably one of the better battles I've seen across racing for, past 6 months probably.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The battles, I didn't catch the whole race, obviously. I just caught bits and pieces, as I'm sure most people did.
Yeah.
But I did watch the highlights afterwards, the extended highlights. I think there's some on YouTube. And I saw that Porsche battle, and that was insane. The guys sliding all over the track. I forget who the drivers were.
It was between the race winner for GTD Pro, Mathieu Gemine, and then Vanthoor, both in Porsches, and almost looked like a NASCAR stock race the way they were just sliding around, painting each other's doors, that kind of thing. It was great to see that they were both willing to kind of duke it out and kind of keep the stakes high while not just absolutely wrecking out just for the finishing place.
Yeah, no, that was probably the most insane edge of your seat racing there was the entire night or the entire race. But I did see at the front in the DPI class, I would say Helio Castroneves, he did cross the line first at the end of the race, and he deserved every bit of that win. He fought for it for the entire race. Every time he was in the car, he was fighting people. That class was insanely competitive. It was really awesome.
Yep.
Patricio Award drove really well. Colton Herta also fighting in LMP2.
There's a name that's been brought up pretty recently here in regards to IndyCar and F1 too.
Yeah, with Pato going to test for McLaren, since he had that deal with Zach Brown, McLaren's CEO. Yeah, he won one IndyCar race. he'd get an F1 test drive that year, and he won 2 last year, I believe. So that was awesome for him. I know he really liked it. He said he had a blast. He was so shocked by the capabilities of that car compared to anything else he's driven.
Yeah, whether it's feasible or not, I would always love to see, drivers from other series just moving around. Obviously, you see F1 drivers like Romain Grosjean, Kevin Magnussen move down from F1 to other races, but seeing a little more shift up too would be really cool, even if it's not for official races, but just for like test drives and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. IndyCar, I mean, I am firmly of the mind that IndyCar drivers are just right up there with F1 drivers as some of the best in the world. If you just look at Scott Dixon, the insane amount of success he's had in that series over his career, I think he'd fit right in. I think Pato O'Ward and Colton Herta would fit right in. I know there have been rumors that they've already been selected to come up next. I personally think that if Daniel Ricciardo doesn't do much better this year, Pato will probably replace him after that.
Interesting.
That's my theory.
Maybe we'll have to put money down on that. Because I know the main rumors surrounding Colton Herta and his drive in F1 was mainly surrounding, was it Andretti? Andretti considering buying into Formula One. Which would have been exciting, but that's a steep entry price, especially nowadays.
Right. The original plan, I thought, was for them to buy into the Sauber team, Alfa Romeo.
Yep.
I think that would have I think because of technicalities, they wouldn't have had to pay a full entry fee for the team. It would have just been kind of a transfer over. But then I know somebody, I think Orlin, didn't want to sell or something like that. I don't even know the specific details, but I know Alfa Romeo backed out, and so that left Andretti with really nothing other than possibly starting a team from scratch, which at that point in the year was not really feasible.
Yeah, no. I honestly don't know if it's really feasible anymore to start a team from scratch. There's just so much so much background work that you have to do on these cars, development, that sort of thing, that it's really difficult to get started unless you buy your way into a team.
Yeah, I'm sure. So yeah, let's talk about that. You have a background in building cars, race cars, developing stuff. Let's talk about that for a little bit. What do you do?
Interesting segue. So I am currently the captain. I have been last year for Oregon Tech Racing, which is a university, a 4-year university down here in Southern Oregon. And I currently captain the Formula SAE spec race team of Oregon Tech Racing. Essentially, a little background on that is, the SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, puts on a collegiate competition where colleges, especially engineering colleges, can put their skills to the test in designing, engineering, building, and marketing a small, really maybe 1/3 size Formula One car, single-seater. We call them Formula SAE spec. Really meant to just crush really tight autocross tracks and cone lots. But I've been getting a chance to learn all about the design process on a very small scale, team management type stuff, in addition to the actual technicalities of race car design.
Gotcha. And you've been doing that all 4 years in college?
All 5 years.
5 years. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I have always been curious. I've known about what you do out there for a little while. How much does downforce come into play? Because I've seen some videos and pictures. You can go follow, I think it's OIT Racing, right, on Instagram?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, go follow OIT Racing on Instagram if you're curious. They post pictures and videos of what they do all the time. It's really interesting. I love seeing what they're doing. So I don't know how much downforce actually comes into play, because it looks like you guys are going quick, but the courses are so tight and the cars are so small. I don't know how that really affects things much.
Yeah, so that is always an interesting question to ask, depending on who you ask. For instance, our team, it's a partially a resources question. We have a really small team. We don't have a whole lot of time between all of our members or the resources to really investigate a full aero package, because at these speeds, it's not an enormous autocross track. We're maybe reaching 50 miles an hour tops based on the design of the track. And that's not a whole lot of headroom for aerodynamics, like downforce, to come into play. Obviously, drag can come into it, but aerodynamics and downforce are kind of selectively chosen based on where your team is at. So if you're our team and you have a lot of other things to improve on, maybe you don't spend as much time on that. But if you're, for instance, OSU, which is the other big Oregon team in addition to Portland State, you have enormous resources and you have enormous skill with your aero packages and your downforce, and that's really how you reach that last 5%, 10% of your performance. But it really depends on where your car is at in the first place, because it's not a tight track, and downforce really is a finicky thing to try to nail down.
Gotcha, I see. So would you say it's more based on the chassis and suspension in terms of how the car handles?
Yeah, and even on that note, down to the driver and how they react to downforce. That's, again, a driver preference too. Maybe you prefer how a downforce car drives compared to a purely suspension-driven car. But it can be used to really elevate a design, but it comes with caveats that, you're adding weight from an aero package, you're adding a whole lot of development time, and you're adding the potential that, maybe there's some unforeseen consequence of an aero package that you didn't see, and that might present itself outside of a typical racing scenario.
Gotcha. Really cool. It's nice to see that there's, whole bunches of up-and-coming engineers coming out of school that are going to keep racing going, hopefully, in the near future.
That's the hope.
All right, so let's transition into our Formula One season predictions. I'm really excited for the season to start. There's been so much drama and controversy, especially over the last year with the battle between Max and Lewis. It's been an absolute roller coaster, and I know for sure that these new regulations are going to give the midfield teams a real shot at punching above their weight when it comes to the Constructors' Championship. So with these new regs, I know that one of the big changes is going to be how the downforce is actually applied to the car. So I don't know, have you read into the new regs much?
Yeah, I took a brief look over them, and a couple things stood out, especially with regards to things like the wheel covers, those little winglets that you see over the wheels, and the barge boards. In addition, I don't know if you noticed, but it doesn't really seem like on the show car that they released, there wasn't a super evident DRS flap necessarily they could point to on the rear wing structure. So I'm kind of interested to see if/how that is implemented differently versus the 2021 aero packages.
Yeah, no, I noticed the same thing. I saw there was a video. I didn't have time to watch it, but I saw a video talking about how the DRS actually works. And it was showing it looks like it was going to show the actuation mechanism and how it actually looked. So I'm sure it's probably pretty similar, but I did see also after the Haas F1 team launched their car a couple days ago, there were a lot of people saying, "Oh, they forgot to put DRS on the rear wing." I was like,
and I
not.
think a big thing to remember there, the Gunther Steiner and one of the upper management for Haas did state after the release that car will change likely before Barcelona for testing, because that's not the final iteration of the car. So while it's a good representative of what we're looking at, the reason it looks so similar to the show car is just because teams haven't gotten to testing in Barcelona yet. So I would expect to see a lot of changes on the Haas car at least, if not every other car in the field after Barcelona.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of the cars are going to change after their launches. Teams don't want to give away too much of what they're doing. The interesting thing about that, though, is with these new regulations for 2022, there's not a lot of leeway for teams to work on, especially their aerodynamic components, because
No, that's something I noticed too.
yeah, the dimensions are all like really exact. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's a big innovation, and if one team figures something out that's going to propel them to the top of the field, kind of like what happened in 2009 when Braun GP did that. Completely nailed the regulations with the double diffuser and won almost
Yeah.
every race that year.
Yeah, so kind of touching on that subject, you notice FIA is kind of strapping down on things that have been exploited by teams in the past, like the Braun exploit, brake ducts. If you remember that whole thing, I believe in, what was that, 2018 for Mercedes, where they had figured out how to use their brake ducts as an aerodynamic device.
I
And
think it would have been 2019 because didn't Racing Point get busted for copying them in 2020?
yes, potentially.
I think.
Either way, sometime before 2020. That so you see the FIA strapping down on things like that with the wheel covers and the winglets too, trying to really prevent teams from innovating in areas where they've seen them innovate before. But I'm also interested to see how the FIA would react to potential, game-changing innovations. Uh, to pull something from the Formula SAE rulebook, the judges have put in a rule where essentially anything that they deem unsafe or not sporting on a Formula car, they can say it's against the rules and it becomes against the rules. So maybe the FIA is pulled a little bit of a sneak and decided to put their foot down on all that kind of thing and really to strap down their word is law with limiting interpretation of rules.
Yeah, so if that's the case, then it's really going to come down to engines. And I don't know if you saw this or saw the news. It wasn't really blown up as much as I thought it would be. But Honda extended their deal with Red Bull until 2025, I believe.
Yes.
So
Yep.
they're not actually
So,
leaving like they said for the last 2 years.
which is interesting, yeah. Another thing that I saw, let me find it in my tabs here, was, I don't know if I'm going to find it, but the FIA will begin homologating the 1.6 liter engine sometime around 2025 too. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I seem to have lost the tab, but it seems like they're going to be potentially strapping down more on engines too in the future.
Interesting. That'll be good. I know a lot of the quote unquote cheats that have been like done in the last decade have been engine related. You know, Ferrari is probably the most famous one.
Yeah.
You know, with their, I mean, I don't know if you saw how they did it, but it was actually really cool and clever.
Yeah, it was. I've watched a couple of technical breakdowns, and of course the donut media kind of combining of all the sources to kind of put it into an easy bite-sized chunk. And honestly, I'm kind of impressed that they got caught at all at one point. But I would, as much as I love to see like little loopholes and innovations made, in terms of a racing series, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see the FIA cracking down more on that kind of thing, and even limiting power unit changes within the seasons.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that would be an added challenge to the whole season. I mean, they have what, 3 engines to make it throughout the season right now, and they just keep adding more races every year. It feels like.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So that was a big thing that seemed really evident this past season, but not the season before. Was engine penalty changes, or rather, penalties for engine changes. And you saw teams like Mercedes, especially Mercedes and Red Bull, making multiple power unit changes throughout the year. If you look at Mercedes towards the back 3/4 of the season, they really turned their car into a rocket ship for those last few races.
yeah, that was one really interesting thing. When Lewis took that engine penalty in Brazil
Mm-hmm.
and put the spicy Brazil engine in, as Mercedes called it.
Yeah,
Um, he was just absolutely flying. But I mean, the reason for that was because they were able to turn the engine up higher, make it run hotter, faster, just because they didn't need it to last as long. Because I think there were only, 3 races left in the season at that point? Maybe 4?
Yep.
4, I think, actually. But still. And they only used it for 3 of them, I believe.
Yeah. So that was pretty impressive, but I think that was probably a one-off that we won't see again in future seasons.
Yeah, and if I recall, they just really messed up Bottas's engines for the whole year. Of course, he did have that crash in Imola with George Russell, where that, I'm sure, was a total loss.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember how much they swapped out, but it must have been driving almost a brand new car at that point.
Yeah, it was a massive accident. All right. So let's see. The Haas launched just a couple of days ago. There was a lot of, mixed feelings on that. I mean, the car looks almost exactly the same as it did last year in terms of the livery. So
Yeah.
I don't know what to take from that in terms of Haas's future. I would say it's not the best look, but
Yeah, my roommate actually said something funny, kind of offhand. He was like, "Man," he said something about the team management being Russian. I was like, "No, it's still Haas. It's still Gene Haas who owns the team technically. His name's on the car, and he's American." He's like, "Interesting." So
yeah.
it's very evidently to a lot of people, even people who watch Formula One pretty closely, that it's definitely not as cut and dry as Haas's name being on the car and Haas being in charge. So as much as I would have liked to see a different livery, I think it was inevitable that we saw kind of the same paint scheme as past year.
Yeah, I would argue that. Well, to me, it's hard to know because a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff like that, we only really get to see in Drive to Survive every year. And, who knows how much of that is accurate, famously.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
one of these days we're going to have to go through and root through and see how much Netflix actually adds.
yeah, but, I mean, last season of Drive to Survive, it made it look like Haas was just falling apart at the seams.
Yeah, which I don't think that was the case.
Yeah.
I think Haas is smarter than that as a team. You kind of have to be to make it to even where they are in the sport. So that's a classic bit of Netflix drama. But I think people were a lot disappointed by this reveal of Haas because Haas was very vocal last year and the year before by how they were not changing their cars for 2 years so that they could put all that resources and funding into the new car, and then to see the new car look A, so similar to the show car, and B, share the same livery and not really that exciting of a design compared to last year's car. I think that was kind of the hype train getting a little bit derailed.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way to put it. Because, they were definitely hyping up. They're like, oh, we're going to be top of the midfield with this new car because we're just stopping all work on the old cars.
And we know that they can be solidly midfield with this management. Maybe not the same driver lineup. I think it's going to take maybe a season or 2 more for Mick and Nikita to actually kind of come to grips with not just the cars, but the politics and the racecraft of Formula One. But we've seen that the management can bring this team to midfield. It's just a matter of how they utilize these resources that they've so vocally saved up.
For sure. I mean, I think it was 2018 they came 4th, right? In the Constructors' Championship, which is incredible for a team their size. I think they said in that season they had, 250 employees or something like that, which is absolutely nothing in the world of Formula One. So the fact that they came 4th place with Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen in those seats that year was incredible, but it seemed like after that they just completely died off, and I almost wonder if Kevin Magnussen and Grosjean were just so much better than everybody gave them credit for.
Well,
Um,
I mean, you've seen both of them do really well in IndyCar, and Kevin Magnussen has been doing. I haven't really kept up with him, but I know he's been at least racing and doing pretty decently in some endurance races.
yeah, he raced actually in the Rolex 24. He was. Let me see if I can see who he raced with. I'm pretty sure it was with Kevin or Marcus Ericsson. Yeah,
Yeah,
Marcus Ericsson, Alex Lynn, and Earl Bamber. So, um, yeah, it's all these ex F1 drivers are going and racing in all these really big series now, and I think it's cool. Like, I almost feel like I mean, obviously the dream is to be in Lewis Hamilton's position.
hmm
That's the childhood dream, right? But I would argue that you almost feel more fulfilled if you spread out your success throughout more series. Um, and Marcus Ericsson especially has really risen to the occasion in IndyCar, as well as Grosjean.
yeah,
Um, Grosjean's return has been incredible. Just after, like, I watched that crash live and I thought he died.
yeah. That was. I didn't see it live, but even not seeing it live, luckily I didn't have anything spoiled for me. But it was an incredible crash, and of course, then he turns right around, goes into IndyCar, and is utilized really well by the team that he drives for, and he's moving to a much more bigger established team this year. So I'm excited to see him get into more of the circle track racing because a lot of the time he was more just the circuit racer for the team. IndyCar is kind of weird. You can use different drivers for different circuits and scenarios.
Right.
But I'm excited to see him take a more role in his new team.
Yeah, I think it's Andretti, right? Andretti Motorsport.
It might be, yeah.
Um, so yeah, he I think has a very bright future in IndyCar ahead of him. He loves the U.S. I can tell. You just follow him on Instagram. He just loves being here, loves living here. So I'm really happy for him that he was able to kind of bounce back. I don't know even just how I could get in a race car after a crash like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of comebacks, I want to talk about my car launch that I'm waiting for F1, which is McLaren.
Oh yeah,
We saw last season that Lando Norris just has so much potential. Especially during that first half of the season, he was on a serious parade of just dominance at the top of the midfield, which is really impressive to see out of such a young driver with a new teammate who's really come to grips with the car. And even though technically he's first driver using air quotations there, not really being able to support in the way that maybe Sergio Perez or Valtteri Bottas has been able to do for their respective teammates. So I'm really impressed with Lando Norris, and I'm excited to see him get into a car that's maybe a bit closer to even the top than they were last year.
yeah, I hope so. It was a little concerning to me. I saw on the news a couple of days ago that Zach Brown didn't seem too confident that they would be fighting at the top this year. He said it was more of a 2 or 3 year deal. So if that's the case, then it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen. I mean, how can you?
No, and I don't think anybody expected Lando Norris to really be that good last season either. I mean, even in Russia, he would have taken top place if he hadn't, made an inexperienced young driver choice
Yeah.
to stay on reins. Whether that was him or the team or a combination of both, I can't really remember. But that's kind of a young driver indecision thing. Whereas you saw the older, more experienced drivers like Lewis Hamilton swap onto wets a lot sooner and make it to the end of the race.
Yep.
And hopefully that's something that Danny Ricciardo can bring to the team once he comes to grip with the car. Because admittedly, I'm biased. He's probably my favorite driver since Kimi Räikkönen retired.
Yeah.
But I really want to see him do well, and I think hopefully starting kind of from zero blank slate with these new cars will kind of rectify some of the problems he was having last year, which seemed to be largely that he just wasn't used to the style of car that McLaren was engineering.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Lando's really exciting to watch. He's one of the stars of the future, I am certain. Daniel Ricciardo is, yeah, I think one of my most anticipated will he won't he stories this season. Like, He says, I don't know if he doesn't do well, and McLaren decides to swap him out for Pato O'Ward, who, by the way, topped the timing sheets in Abu Dhabi in the driver's test.
Did he really?
Yeah, by I think quite a margin, if I remember correctly. Um, so if they decide to swap him out, which I really would not be surprised, I don't know where he's gonna go.
Yeah,
Like
because
everywhere's set right now for a while, other than maybe I don't know Alpine, because like Fernando Alonso is not going to be in the sport for probably more than a year or two.
yeah,
And then,
that's an interesting conundrum there. So, I mean, my main strategy is just to hope that he starts to come to grips with the car more at McLaren and not have to worry about where he goes if he's let go.
yeah, hopefully. I love the guy too. He's one of my favorite drivers. So hopefully he does well. Let's see. When do we got? Let me go through the list of the launches we know so far. Let's see. We got Red Bull on February 9th, Aston Martin on February 10th, McLaren on February 11th, AlphaTauri February 14th, Ferrari on February 17th, Mercedes on February 18th, Alpine on February 21st, Alfa Romeo on February 27th. Haas was already done on the 4th, and Williams I don't think has been announced yet. So
Very interesting.
pretty busy next couple weeks. I'm super stoked.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited to just be watching and get distracted from all my other lifestyle responsibilities to see these cars and pore over all the details.
Yeah, that's oh man, I love F1 so much. I'm so excited for it to be back. I have missed it in the off season just with the amount of insanity that happened last season. It just felt like it all came to a grinding, screeching halt, and just
Yeah,
like after headline on the daily last year, it's like we're going weeks at a time without any news this year, and it's quite the change.
we're in a little bit of an F1 drama hangover, I think, after Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, one of the big stories this off season was whether or not Lewis Hamilton will retire before the start of this next season. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see it happening for a while. I think he's still, age-wise, he's still young, but he's got, at this point, so much experience over a lot of the grid, except for, Vettel and Alonso and some of the older drivers. So I think he's still got a ways to go in the sport, especially in this new car era. I think he's going to stick around and see just how far he can take the new cars.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't know if you saw, but he just finally posted something on social
He
media for
finally
the first
reappeared,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, so and just by the caption of that, which I think I was like he said, I was gone, but now I'm back, or something like that. I think that's just kind of him saying I'm not leaving.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I think after everything that happened, no matter what side of it you're on, I think it's probably healthy for him to probably get away from all of it, whether you're his fan, endless support, or Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton isn't your favorite driver. I think being able to get away with that and kind of reassess and reset your mind to racing, I think that'll prove really beneficial for him.
Yeah, I hope so. I would be really sad to see him go if he decided to leave. I think he is definitely still at the top of his game. And I would love to see another fight between him and Max. Because if I'm being honest, I think it's going to be Red Bull and Mercedes at the top again this year. Ferrari
Yeah,
might join in.
maybe. But the thing you have to think about is, in terms of team management, both Red Bull and Mercedes are far more used to being at the top at this point in their current states than any other team. So they have a mentality and all the other groundwork laid outside of the car to be champions this season.
Absolutely. Um, I don't think Perez is going to take it to Max in terms of actually giving him a challenge. I think Perez has a certain driving style that just kind of hinders him from doing that, where he struggles in qualifying and then he's really good in races, and so he just plays catch up for the entire race.
He's a very conservative driver compared to his teammate.
Oh, that is 100% true, and he's very consistent too, which is why I think Red Bull picked him up, is because he always scores points.
Yeah, although I do think that might end up biting him this season, because I honestly think Lando might actually have a chance at consistently, taking it to Perez and George Russell, both of them, and making them really, feel a little bit of heat on their backs.
Yeah. How do you think George Russell will compare to Lewis Hamilton this year at Mercedes?
Well, we saw a little bit of him, not last season, but the season before Abu Dhabi, I believe, right?
It was
Or was that
Bahrain.
Bahrain.
Well, it was Sakir was the name of the race. It was
Sakir,
the outer circuit.
Right. And he did pretty well. Granted, that car was really, really dominant over even the Red Bull cars at that point. So talking from a clean slate, all drivers on the same level, I don't see George really picking it up a huge amount this season. Luckily, he's been at Williams long enough to, kind of develop his racecraft and figure out the field and all their strategies. But I think it'll take a little more time to pick up the slack than a lot of people are thinking, just because it's a huge amount of pressure. Not only racing for Mercedes, but racing alongside Hamilton and kind of acquiring this huge. He essentially has become a brand, a lot like Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. Yeah. George, I think, is a really fast learner. I don't know if he'll be able to keep up with Lewis. I don't think anyone really could, other than Max. So I think he's gonna pick it up quickly though, and I think the year after 2023 will be when he really starts to break out. Yeah, like you said, I think the biggest change for him is going to be the amount of pressure he's under, because at Williams, like a DNF basically meant nothing for his entire time there.
Yeah, they're racing for any battles, really, not even necessarily for points, but just to battle other drivers, aside from Haas, of course.
Right, and so that's, in terms of pressure, probably the least amount of pressure that you could be under. So moving from that to the defending championship team, where you're expected to put up no worse than fourth place every single race. That's going to be an adjustment for sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to see Red Bull hold on to a driver for a bit longer than half a season. So I think that'll be a big help to Perez's confidence.
Yeah, for sure. Who do you think would replace him? Do you think they're going to go back to Gasly? Do you think Gasly would even go to Red Bull?
Gasly, that's because you saw the first season. He was very intent on showing that Red Bull was wrong to replace him with Albon. He was much younger than he was, I believe. He felt a little bit slighted by that, I think. So he's been doing really well at AlphaTauri, and I wouldn't be surprised if they reshuffle some things to, in the future, if Perez starts failing to get less than greater than fourth place every race. I could see them potentially bringing him back up now that he's had a bit more experience at a midfield team.
Yeah, I could see it. It's just really hard to say, but I mean, Gasly is obviously one of the most talented drivers on the grid, in my opinion, just because of the consistent placement of that car where it doesn't belong, especially in qualifying.
Yeah.
Especially like compared to his teammate, I don't know if Tsunoda is just not hitting the mark or if Gasly is just that insanely good.
I think it's probably a combination of both. I think Tsunoda will do a lot better this season.
I hope so.
He seemed like he really wasn't used to the culture of F1 necessarily when he first started, but as he got into the season, you saw him kind of settle into his role and kind of realizing what he's doing.
Yeah, he
But
had on a
yeah,
mouth out on when he started.
yeah, that was kind of funny, but I think it maybe stretched Red Bull and AlphaTauri's patience a little bit.
Yeah, I was convinced he was just shooting himself in the foot, but alas, he got re-signed for the next year. Um,
Yep.
so who do we think? Who do we think's gonna be the surprise breakout team of the season? Um, I think I honestly I don't know. It's so hard to say before any of the launches and any of the testing. But Aston Martin has even just this off season has expanded so much,
Right.
and they're building up so much that even if they don't break out this year, I think they will be at the top of the table within 2 or 3 years' time.
I think I could see that. I do think Vettel is getting on in years. I think he won't be looking to stay in for a huge amount of time. So it's really a matter of how Stroll progresses. Because last season, or the season before, he was really actually kind of proving himself on the race. He was having some pretty good placements. Uh, this past season, he kind of faded into the background behind Vettel. So I'm hoping that maybe he can kind of start picking up the slack this season so that Vettel can maybe look to step back, and in that case, that might be an exciting driver lineup, depending on who they replace Vettel with.
Yeah.
But for this season, I think my pick. It's really hard for me to say. Uh, Part of my heart really wants to say Haas, but I don't think that'll be true. But I think Alpine, probably Fernando Alonso has been doing really well. Speaking of older drivers, and I think Ocon has actually been learning a decent amount from him, and he even got, you know, he did pretty well last season, as you could see from what race was that? Just the absolute mess of a race.
Oh, Hungary? Or
Yeah,
are you
Hungary.
talking about? Okay.
Yeah. So I have to think that's the team that has some promise this year. I know they keep memeing about L Plan, but I think in more serious terms, they actually have a shot at being seriously close to the top of the midfield.
Yeah, I agree. I think Fernando is a great addition to that team, and he brings a lot of experience to that team. And this year, provided nothing terrible happens, he will pass Kimi Räikkönen with the record for most race starts.
Oh, that's right.
So that'll be cool. I was looking up earlier today the records that Kimi will still hold, and a lot of them are just kind of like longevity based.
Yep.
Like he's got the longest time between two wins, or no, it's the most amount of races between two wins is what it is.
Yeah. I think
but-
Kimi's probably a lot happier as the team principal for Kawasaki Motocross, the factory-backed team.
Oh, is that what he's doing now?
Yeah, he decided he got bored, and he's made it very clear that this is something that he's seriously invested in, which I think is interesting to see after he was, he seemed pretty done with F1, but I think that was a lot of politics. So going down to something a bit more grassroots, like Kawasaki Motorsport as the factory-backed team, I think he'll do pretty well in that.
Yeah, that'll be really cool. I'll have to keep an eye on that. All right, so let's see. Looking at the calendar this year, we got a couple new tracks, or just one new track to start with. The Miami GP in the United States. The track looks really cool, and runs through Hard Rock Stadium. So I think it's going to be kind of like a Mexican Grand Prix kind of vibe in terms of that track, with the stadium section and long straights.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be a really good race to watch. I'm excited to see how that all shakes out. We had a couple of new races on the track last year with Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Qatar is not on the calendar this year, but it is starting next year, and I believe they have a 10-year deal.
I think,
So-
10 or 20 year.
Yeah, so that'll be
So
interesting.
quite a far ways out. I think it's interesting the placement of the Miami Grand Prix in the calendar. It's right after the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix and right before the Spanish Grand Prix.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot of traveling. Luckily, there's a decent amount of space between the Emilia-Romagna and Miami Grand Prix, but yeah, it's kind of out of the way. Usually we have the U.S. race a bit further on in the season, as you can see with the United States Grand Prix. So.
Yeah, it is interesting. I didn't even notice that, but there are 2 weeks in between each race there, so they should have enough time to make everything work. But yeah, that's quite the hopping around from Italy to U.S. back to Spain.
Yep.
So.
And
yeah.
if you look at the top of the calendar, you'll see that they've stopped trying to get Australia as the first race of the season.
Yeah, I did see that.
They've given up on the bad juju surrounding that, evidently.
Yeah, they put it as third this time. And even then, they're hopping from Saudi Arabia to Australia, back to Italy. That's a lot of jumping around, too. But, that's why these guys are the best.
Yep.
All right. So, I also heard there's rumors floating around of a Las Vegas
Vegas,
street
baby.
circuit.
Yeah.
That would
I'm
be
actually really
so
excited
cool.
about that one.
If that actually pans out, that's a race I would go to every year.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
I
on
can
record
drive
with
there.
a lot. Yeah, I'm on record with a lot of my friends as hating Vegas. I went there one time for a Formula SAE competition last June, and it was just miserable there. But I think if they get it early enough in the season or late enough, so spring or fall, it might actually be tolerable to visit and watch an F1 race. And it's much closer to the West Coast than either Texas or Miami.
Yeah, so when you say it was miserable, was it just the heat?
It was a lot the heat, really packed. Just if you're not into cigarette smoke, then I wouldn't recommend going to Vegas at all. But
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it was fun, but you wouldn't do it again. Kind of like living in a dorm room.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see. I think that if they did do a race in Las Vegas, it would be a night race. I don't see them doing a race down the strip during the day. That makes no sense to me.
No, they would have
Plus,
to get
temperatures would be lower.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big thing. You think it would be around the strip?
I don't see how else they would do it if it's a street circuit. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole point of F1 is money, right? So that
That's true.
If they don't race around the strip, I don't really get the point. But last time they had a race in Las Vegas, it was in the Caesars Palace parking lot. So
There's been a few changes to Las Vegas since then. It's been a while. But
yeah.
I could see them potentially doing it on the strip. The roads have kind of changed. There's a lot of, partitions and all sorts of stuff like that. I could see them kind of building its own racetrack even, kind of nearby. There's a lot of just open desert around that area. And they even have the Las Vegas Motor Speedway. They have infrastructure for, racetracks and paddocks. So maybe the wild card is that they completely redo the Motor Speedway into a F1 class racetrack right outside of the city proper.
It's possible. Okay. So let's see. The season starts on March 20th in Bahrain. There's testing the week before that, and that will be the first time we see cars on track. There is obviously testing in Barcelona before that at the end of this month, but it is closed and not going to be televised at all. So that's kind of unfortunate. But we will see the fastest times around that circuit posted by F1 after testing. So we'll have maybe a little bit more of an idea of who's out in front, but at the same time, testing doesn't really mean anything. So
yeah, no, I mean, you always hear the joke about Mercedes sandbagging and testing, but I think to a degree that there's truth there. I think a lot of teams don't show their hands at testing, so I'll be waiting until Bahrain to see how they do.
Yeah, I think FP1 and Bahrain we'll start to see, and then for sure during the race, we'll start to see more of who's got what and what the season's going to look like.
Yep. Do you want to talk about what the IndyCar season might look like? I know you're kind of wanting to start watching that.
Yeah, I just started watching it last year for the first time, so admittedly I know little about the sport compared to Formula One, but the races I did watch were insane, incredible. Just with the cars being basically spec cars, everybody's on a level playing field, so you really get the best drivers fighting it out at the front, which means since every track suits a driver's driving style differently. I mean, even the best driver is going to have an off day at one of his off tracks, and someone else will win. And so it's really different than F1. It's a completely different sport, and it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, not quite as fast, but the drivers there are just fearless. Especially if on the topic of Roman Grosjean during the Laguna Seca race, he pretty much coming off the corkscrew hopped over another driver's wheels to take that place. It's pretty incredible, not just the durability of the cars, but the fearlessness of the drivers to really just put themselves into just insane situations there to get the place.
Yeah, no, they definitely have guts in IndyCar. And that's another thing. You're talking about the durability of the cars. The tracks in the United States are really bumpy compared to everywhere else in the world.
Yeah, it's a lot of road circuits.
Yeah, so Laguna Seca has a lot of bumps in it. Circuit of the Americas is notoriously bumpy and destroys. Like, if you listen to the radios, like, the teams talk about the curbs in Circuit of the Americas and I think Monza, like, more than any other tracks because they're just absolutely deadly and they just rip cars apart. And Austria, too, has really bad curbs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of a thing with American tracks, it seems. Laguna Seca is a legendary, world famous track. But I just don't think an F1 car could drive. I think it would just absolutely destroy itself.
Yeah, no, and they just don't have the size either. An F1 car, needs a little bit of space to activate DRS and make it past other cars. And obviously that's hopefully a change that's coming this new season, is that maybe DRS isn't as necessary in order to make a pass or a long straight or something like that. But the reason these IndyCar drivers get so close and so personal with the other drivers in terms of trading paint is because these tracks, Laguna Seca is a good example, are just smaller than the typical F1 track, which, although I'd love to see F1 at Laguna Seca because A, it's super close, and B, it's probably one of my favorite race tracks. These tracks are just small and tight, so it makes the racing small and tight too.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to put it. IndyCar, another reason I think the racing is closer is because of the push-to-pass system. You drivers have to use so much more strategy, I feel, in IndyCar because you hit so many more times in IndyCar compared to Formula One. Like, in IndyCar, a four-stop race is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to refuel, which obviously is not allowed in F1 anymore. So in IndyCar, you refuel, you got tires as well, and then you can only have a certain amount of people in the pit stop, and so that adds another layer to how complex it all is. One of my I know this might be weird. One of my favorite things to see in IndyCar pit stops is when they take this massive fire hose and spray the car off as it's driving away, so that there's no fuel left on it.
It's. I mean, there's obviously a reason that they switched to just carrying all the fuel on board in F1, but so it was exciting to have that little extra stakes involved in pit stops and a little more strategy involved in terms of how much time it takes, because these IndyCar teams aren't Red Bull pit teams where they're banging out a pit stop in less than 2 seconds. They're taking their time. They're a lot more deliberate. Not to say that the F1 pit stops aren't deliberate, but they take a bit more time because they gain time elsewhere.
Right, and a lot of the time is, refueling. So, I mean, in IndyCar, you have probably about 9 seconds to change the tires before, it's waiting on the tires because the fuel takes 8 to 9 seconds usually.
Yeah.
So that's a completely different thing to Formula One, which is, yeah, so, and drivers can make passes off track just by taking a lighter fuel load, then overtaking in the pits, and then then they have to either manage their fuel or make another stop, and that's just it adds so much strategy to the mix that it's actually it's so cool because you get to see different people leading the race at different times, and then on the last few laps it all comes together at the end. You see who's really in front.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot. Some parts are hard to keep track of, but the overall strategy is really complex and really interesting to watch play out. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard somebody who is really into IndyCar say is that if the rules are gray, you're free to play. So, track limits are not as strict. You can, do crazy things in the pit lane, all to gain the edge over the opponent, which I absolutely think kind of limits the amount that teams are trying to push to find loopholes in the actual car rules, because there's so many other ways that you can gain time that give you a lot better times than, trying to squeak by an extra vortices generator on your barge board.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, he said they don't watch track limits as closely, and I just thought back to a clip I saw of them racing IndyCar racing at the Circuit of the Americas, and they were just on the second to last corner. They went so incredibly wide to maintain their speed.
Yeah.
That they went so far off the track, and no one said anything, and it just looked absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, that's just racing, man.
But yeah, now anything to get ahead. So last year, Alex Palou won the championship ahead of Joseph Newgarden and Pato O'Ward. It was really close at the top, until the last race. I think there were 6 drivers that could technically mathematically win it going into the last race.
Yeah, all the way down to Marcus Ericsson, I think, right?
Something like that. So, yeah, that's another thing about IndyCar is it stays way closer between the best drivers. I think Pato O'Ward is gonna do really well this year. I think he's been so good in everything he's touched now he's got more experience in IndyCar, and he only ramped up towards the end of the season. So I think it's going to be between Palou and O'Ward this year for the top.
Yeah.
Possibly Scott Dixon coming back into it. And even Roman Grosjean, now being at Andretti, he scored, what was it? He got 1 pole position, got 4 top 5 finishes, 6 top 6 finishes, I think 2 podiums.
Yeah. And that was
his rookie
yeah.
year. That's insane.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, he wasn't racing in all the races.
Yeah, he skipped out on the ovals.
Yeah, he skipped on the ovals, primarily did the road circuits, which it sounds like, I don't have a source for it, but it sounds like that's something that he's looking to get into, is more the oval racing too.
Yeah, he will be racing in all of the races this year, including the 500.
So I think you saw in F1, he's not afraid to get in a little bit of a fight. So I think in IndyCar, where you can really capitalize on that, I think he could actually do pretty well. I think the old hats, Palau, Pato O'Ward, Colin Herta, not necessarily like old drivers, but people who have been doing it a little longer. I think he's still going to be chasing them, but I don't think it's long before he kind of comes to grips with it.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really fascinating to see what happens there. And then also we got a couple of new drivers coming in with Callum Ilott. Let me see who are the rookies this year. Callum Ilott, Christian Lundgaard, David Malukas, Devlin DeFrancesco, Kyle Kirkwood, and Tatiana Calderon are all rookies this year. So we have a large field of rookies fighting for that rookie of the year this year, which will be fun to watch.
Yep, that's honestly one of the great things about IndyCar is there's so many drivers for all the different teams. It's not just a static 2, You have multiple drivers for all these teams who might, race one time and not race another time, but it's a good chance for the new drivers to get initiated without having to only race, after everybody else is finished with the big event for the weekend.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. The barrier for entry for IndyCar is so much smaller than other motorsports. Like, it doesn't cost $300 million a year to run a team. It's
No.
it's I think what it was 40, which is still insane. I don't actually have a source for the numbers, but I know it's like only a fraction of the size of like an F1 team. Which that's why there's so many more cars, so many more teams, and you just get a team that runs one car, or there's so many more options for people wanting to get into the sport. That
Yeah, there really is.
it's super inclusive. Everybody's on the same field, so if you got a good team, you can win, which is one thing I love about the sport.
Yep.
So yeah, let's see. Who do we think we talked about? Who we think we're gonna see at the top? I think Colton Herta is gonna be up there too. He's really good.
Yeah, I think he's got a little something to prove too. All the rumors with Andretti and Alfa Romeo Sauber.
Yeah,
I think hopefully he has something a little bit to prove that, hey, look, I'm an IndyCar driver, but I could just as easily go into F1 and, be right up there at one of the teams.
absolutely. I think there are several people in this field that could do that and make it pretty seamless. And there's also, there's a lot of ex-F1 drivers in this field, like Grosjean and Marcus Ericsson. I think Alexander Rossi even, was a Formula One driver for a couple of years in the early 2000s.
Right.
So,
And
there's
Callum
a few.
Milo sounds familiar too. I want to say he was probably one of the junior drivers for one of the teams, right?
Callum Ilott was an F2 last year.
Yeah.
And he actually started his he had his IndyCar debut last year, but it says that he's eligible for Rookie of the Year this year, so I'm sure if you come in maybe like more than halfway through the season, you're a rookie next year, I guess, probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gonna be another thrilling IndyCar year, I'm sure. Probably really close. There's lots of up and comers that look really good in this field. So the first race of the season is on February 27th. So that's coming up. I'm definitely looking forward to that. So that's in St. Petersburg, in Florida, that street circuit, which always has good racing. So other than IndyCar, I'm really looking forward to MotoGP starting up. And WRC is pretty much a year-round thing, so we'll talk about that on the show just as things happen. And then World Endurance Championship just started up too, so we'll have a lot to talk about here in the next few months.
Yeah, maybe Formula E. I'd have to be convinced. He'd have to buy me dinner first before we talk about Formula E a whole lot.
Formula E's that's a whole different.
I'm not really quite sure what I think about Formula E yet.
I don't think they quite have the format perfected. I think they still need to tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I don't think Formula E quite knows what to think about Formula E yet.
Yeah, they change the rules so much every year, and it just seems like with the speed zones and the weird fan boost stuff, it just feels like a video game almost.
Yeah, it almost feels more like if Formula One, like the actual Formula One cars, had social media pages.
Exactly. It's a popularity contest.
It really is. So yeah. I hope to see it kind of take off in popularity later on down the line, but for now, might have to be coerced into watching some of those races.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting series for sure, but the more the merrier. Electric cars are definitely the future of just automobiles in general. So I think it's important, regardless of its shortcomings.
Yeah.
That they get that going to bring awareness to it, because I don't think people realize how close electrification is. So, yep, that is the future of our channel, talking about all the different series going on around the world. We'll try to stay on international stuff, but I'll throw IndyCar in there as well, even though that's primarily in the U.S. I think only in the U.S. actually. So that's kind of where we're at. We will probably do another episode before the start of the season. Hopefully after testing, or maybe during testing, and then before the first race, just to kind of give our final predictions. Maybe a shorter episode on that one. But then once the F1 season especially launches, we'll start doing our probably weekly shows or bi-weekly. Haven't really decided yet, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
We will indeed.
Alrighty, so thank you everybody so much for listening on whatever platform you chose to listen to. I really appreciate it. I am Nathan Nevue, and this has been...
Follow me at OIT Racing on Instagram. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.